Hello and welcome back. You're watching Numbers and the Narrative. This is a special series in which I take up key numbers released by the government about the economy, about different sectors. They could be also from the corporate sector, they could be also numbers from the central bank of the country, the Reserve Bank of India. They could be from anywhere that might be of interest, that might be of some consequences to have a better understanding of the state of the economy. In this edition, unsurprisingly, we are going to be talking about the budget that was presented on Sunday by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. Very proudly, she proclaimed that she had made a commitment 5 years ago that she would bring the fiscal deficit under 4.5% of the GDP in 5 years. And she said she has done it. In fiscal year 2025-26, the fiscal deficit is now estimated to be around 4.4% of the country's gross domestic product. What is interesting that in absolute terms, it is actually going to be slightly lower than what the budget had estimated. A lot of analysts puzzled because all these months, what we have been hearing from the government through the monthly updates of the Finance Ministry, through the monthly updates of the Controller General of Accounts, that the government's tax collections have been consistently month after month falling short of the budget targets, not by a small margin but by a big margin. So how on earth, when you have such a big hole in your tax kitty, when money is not coming in, how on earth you are able to keep your fiscal deficit under check? Before we get into the details, let's first take up the revenue piece. Against a target of 28.4 lakh crore or 28.4 trillion rupees in tax revenues for the center that was targeted for this financial year, the government now expects it will raise somewhere around 26.7 lakh crore or 26.7 trillion rupees. That's a shortfall of 1.63 trillion. And this shortfall is largely caused by 11% shortfall seen in the case of goods and services tax and a 9% shortfall in personal income tax, which clearly point to a sluggish economy. That people's incomes have not grown as they were expected to grow. Consumption demand hasn't been realized the way they were expected while framing the budget in last February, which is why you have lower GST collections, which is why you have lower income tax collections. Of course, there were a certain amount of income tax relief that was given, but those were baked into the numbers already. In case of GST, there were some cuts halfway through the year, but they were limited to products that account for only 20% of the total GST revenue. So obviously, 11% decline in GST collections cannot be attributed to the cuts that the government announced in the month of September, October. So clearly, it's a matter of concern. Now, let's park that concern aside. Let's move over. If you have such shortfall in taxes, how does it play out? Now, part of these losses have been offset by what you can say a kind of a windfall gain. The government is managing to raise 50,000 crore more than what it had targeted or it was hoping to get by way of dividends and profit sharing from state-owned firms and the Reserve Bank of India. The budget for 25-26 had put that number at 3.25 lakh crore or 3.25 trillion. Instead, now, thanks to a significantly higher payout by the RBI, the government estimates that number will reach 3.75 trillion rupees or 3.75 lakh crore, which means roughly about 50,000 crore has come in from that. But that's not enough to offset the drop in tax collections, which is estimated to be in the order of 1.63 trillion rupees as far as the centre's share in the total tax collections is concerned. Moreover, we must remember even disinvestment proceeds, which were expected to be about 47,000 crore, are now expected to be about 33,000 crore, which means there are about 14 to 15,000 crore shortfall there as well. So, against a 1.8 trillion or 1.8 lakh crore shortfall in tax revenue and disinvestment proceeds, you have gotten 50,000 crore extra, but that still leaves a big gap. And how do you bridge that? Now, here comes the real trick that the finance minister has played, because this trick is on states. There is a big squeeze in the money that had been promised to the states. If you look at the grant in aid and loans and assistance that the centre had promised to the states to create capital assets, this includes the money that states spend on programs like MGNREGA as well, the rural job guarantee plan, which is now being reframed and rephrased as Viksit Bharat Ji Ramji scheme. 4.27 lakh crore were to be transferred to the states in the current financial year. Instead, the finance minister now estimates that transfer to be limited to 3.08 lakh crore or 3.08 trillion rupees. A straight 1.2 trillion drop out there, 1.2 trillion squeeze. That's a very big squeeze, and that has got serious implications because states have to find money to undertake many developmental spending, the onus of which rests on their shoulder, not on the centre. And they are closer to the people, they are more accountable to the people, they are more answerable to the people. This is going to have certain political ramifications, but be that as it may, we are focusing on how the numbers have been worked around. So 1.63 trillion shortfall in tax collections, roughly about 14,000 crore shortfall in disinvestment, partially gets upset because the RBI and state-owned firms give 50,000 crore more than what was expected, but that's not enough. So the centre puts a big squeeze on the money it would be transferring to states in the current year. Against a promise of 4.27 lakh crore, states are now expected to get 3.08 lakh crore. And that's where the cut hurts. But if we look even more closely, sectorally, where has the money been cut? Sample this. Urban development. The finance minister's budget speech, not once but multiple times and for a reasonable period of time, emphasized how cities can be a key instrument of accelerating economic growth and how this government wants to do a lot of things to leverage the real potential of Indian cities. But those words are not matched by action. In 25-26, the government was expected to spend 98,000 crore on urban development. How much are they going to spend now? Spending on urban development would be around 57,000 crore. That's almost a 41% drop. Now, what is the point of making big claims when you cannot carry them through? It's not just urban development. Even rural development. Rural development, the money that was promised for rural development in this current financial year, the spending now is expected to be almost 30% lower. You heard the finance minister emphasizing on the need to make India technology ready and how this government is committed to the vision of a vibrant digital India, startup culture, artificial intelligence. A long list was spelled out yesterday during the budget speech. Now here is the truth. In 25-26, the government set aside a budgetary allocation of about 56,000 crore to be spent on scientific developments. But now the finance minister estimates that spending will not be more than 37,000 crore. That's a huge drop. 20,000, again almost to the tune of 35%. Now what is the point of using all these high sounding phrases about making India technology ready when you cannot even spend the money you set aside for scientific developments? We do not know whether it's intentional or it is deliberate. Whatever the case may be, when you cut back on spending or when you are unable to spend on such critical areas such as urban development, rural development, scientific developments, then you are undermining the future growth story. More importantly, the cuts have come in key social infrastructure, education, health, social welfare. Social welfare, where the budget provided for a spending of almost 60,000 crore, the revised estimates show only 50,000 crore would be spent. On education, where nearly 1.29 lakh crore or 1.29 trillion rupees were to be spent, the government is going to spend 1.21 trillion rupees. That's a big shortfall. It's not that the government has or is cutting its spending under every head. Choices have been made. There are areas which are probably for the government politically sensitive or politically compelling, and that's where the government has no problem spending. And we see that if you take food and fertilizer subsidy, there is no cutback. On the contrary, there has been higher spending on these two heads. So the government would not like its free ration scheme to be disrupted, because that could prove politically inexpedient. The same goes for fertilizer subsidy. There was a huge urea shortage and the government did step in and spend money because it didn't want farmers to be on the streets. That urgency we fail to see in the sphere of education, scientific developments, urban housing or urban amenities, because there is no one to protest. And when you need to show to the world that you are being fiscally prudent, you quietly cut money on these heads. Interestingly, police and defense have seen allocations go up. So clearly, it's not a question of the government not having money or the government not having the intent. Areas where there has been cutbacks, one would like to believe that they are a deliberate act. They are not accidental. And that brings us to the last question. What do you achieve when you keep fiscal deficit under check by cutting expenditure in areas that are critical to future growth? You probably get a pat on the back. The markets love it when the government reduces its fiscal deficit, because if the government reduces its fiscal deficit, it enhances the chances of interest rates softening. So the markets, the corporates, they all love it. But is true fiscal credibility really about just hitting a number, no matter how you get there? Or Should it be about the quality of that achievement, about its sustainability, and what it means for the future? Think about it. Thank you for watching.